be talking to you all about today is the real cost of live operations on your design and how that needs to change, evolve, and morph, and things you can do to kind of mitigate a lot of risks that you face as designs and a development team, right? So a little bit about me first. My name is CHIRAG RAMCHANDANI. I'm currently working as a game designer at Zynga. I lead the Farmville 2 design organization currently. And for me as a player, XCOM by far is definitely my favorite franchise of games. So if you ever want to talk XCOM, please come catch me after this at any point. So yeah, let's get into it. So live ops. What is live ops? You can effectively define live ops as any improvement that a game team makes to the game after the release and launch of the game. These can be things like adding new levels, adding new features, fixing bugs in the game. And what this helps you with is drive key metrics for that game. Things like DAU, daily active players, what kind of revenue you're going to be looking at, engagement, and other key metrics that you're going to be driving. But the core essence to live ops effectively is being able to maintain that product for a long duration of time with minimum cost to make it as profitable as possible, right? That is the essence of running a true live operations game. So I want some audience participation here. So who in the room currently works on live ops, right? Let's see a show of hands. Okay, who wants to work on live ops? So who has worked on live ops? Yeah, nice. Okay, so you're going to see this very, very common problem with working in live ops. What you expected when you started with your design process versus what you get at the end. It could be something like that, or it could be something completely different. You started off with this vision that was this character walking through the game, there's a stream, the NPCs coming, they're interacting with, but you end up with a car. Why, how, nobody knows, right? And this has happened to any of y'all? I'm sure, yeah? So what do you do really to avoid this? And I'm going to be sharing some small tips and tricks to kind of help you along this way. And it's really pretty simple actually. Effectively, all you need to do is answer one simple question. Why? Just answer that question, why? And before I get more into detail about the why, I just want to segue into design as a whole, right? Design as a whole, in an ideal state, is the absolute perfect balance of problem solving and opportunity. You want to find that midway, solve a lot of opportunities, areas for growth, as well as problems. But in a live ops scenario, it just tends to be more problem solving, right? It's very reactive. Something will break in the game, something's going wrong, something's tanking on a metric front, and you are reacting to this. That ends up being design. Like, figure out what that problem that you're trying to solve and break it down as granularly as possible. What are the smaller components that you can break it down to digest that problem so you can understand it better and solve it better? Let's look at an example for this. So say we were looking at the problem which is your DAU, or daily active players, are a little lower than you expect them to be, right? And that can happen from time to time for a various multitude of reasons. So you start to figure out what those reasons are. They could be things like from a particular country there aren't as many players playing. And this could be because of there's a festive season going on there. There could be connectivity issues. But these aren't really design problems, right? It could also be things like a particular cohort or a group of players, say a level 150 and above players are blocked because a bug in the game or something that you didn't consider when you designed it. This happens. And that's just the honest truth of working in live ops. What do you do at that point? You ideate potential solutions, and the most important bit is after your implementation, after this fix has reached your players, you have to follow up. Without that follow-up, it's just a little dead in the water. You can't just release something, get it to players, and expect it to fix itself without you checking and following up on it. So another really important thing is to keep your eye on the prize, right? You have that one goal, and it's really easy to start to fix other problems, other things when you have that opportunity. You see one release going out, you're fixing something else, and you remember of something else that was broken in the game. But the more you start to add, the more it clouds, the more it muddies the water, and the more problems that you can encounter. Focus on the problem, solve from that problem, and then take that separate issue as a separate release altogether. So going back now to that one simple question, why? Let's break it down, as we said, for this process of releasing and fixing things. How do we break down why? Effectively, as a designer, I break down the why into 3 components. There's the design aspect of it, there's the business aspect of it, and there's how do players react to that. I'm going to start off talking about the design side of why. Before I get into the design side of why, you can ask this question no matter what framework for design you use. Personally, one of my favorites is the Mda framework, which is mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics. It's where, as a player, first you're designing the mechanic, the rules that you want the player to feel, to go through, the gameplay as the mechanics, and the experience as the aesthetics in terms of engagement from that player. So, to ask yourself why for the design itself. Ask yourself this question, why this design? Imagine you're climbing to a summit of a mountain. There's not one path you can take. There are many, many different paths. Often the path somebody else has taken before you is the easiest option. Someone's done the work, right? You're not reinventing the wheel. But how do you know that's the best option? You don't. You need to evaluate these things for yourself. So you need to answer, why is this the best design for me? Why is this the best design for my players and for my game in a given scenario? So knowing why this is the best path for you, for your game, is the most important thing here. And after that, you need to convey this information to your team. Say, me and some of you are designing something together. I may have this idea, but if I don't tell you what is important, why do I believe in it? Why do I think this idea will solve the current problem? How are you supposed to know that this will solve it? How are you supposed to have that faith in me and my thoughts and my process as a designer? Explain your process to your teammates. It gives them that confidence, and they will be able to have the ability to add on to that if they understand the process of why you're doing something. Let's take an example of this. Everybody here knows what game this is? PUBG, yeah? And it's a relatively straightforward screen. This is a daily login bonus. What does a daily login bonus as a design try to achieve? It tries to strive to get players to engage and log into the game on an everyday basis. Now that is your goal. Get players to log in every day to your game. Are there different things you can do to make this happen? Definitely. Why do you think PUBG has chosen a daily login bonus, which is guaranteed? It tells you exactly on which day do you get what reward. That is because that player audience wants to know what they're going to get. Very easily, they could have done a loot or a luck-based system, which was something like a spin wheel, where the reward and the payout for the player could be variable, where the player logs in, spins the wheel, and gets a random reward. That has its own pros and cons. What this does is, if I'm a player, I have a cycle where I play PUBG, I know I want to come in on day 7, which is a Sunday, because day 7 is the best reward. And on day 7 is generally where games, on Sundays is generally where games see a bit of softness and weakness in their daily active users. Sunday, nobody's working, everybody just wants to spend time with their family. Again, it depends. There are a lot of reasons. So there are lots of paths that you can take to solve a problem. Figure out what is the best one for you, why it's best for you as a developer, why it's best for your players, right? So that's about why from the design aspect of it. Do we have any questions about this? I'm happy to take some now, or I'll take some at the end as well.
So regarding the daily logins,
yeah.
So is it better to show the players so that they can anticipate what they're getting every day, or do you want or do we keep it a surprise every day?
So again, that's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
What's your audience? Who's your audience? Who's this for? Do your players like surprise?
Okay.
If your players, maybe one of these options could have been a mystery box, and you show what is potentially available from that mystery box. And if it's a really large reward, is that aspirational enough for a player? Would they want to come back for that reward? For a chance at that reward, rather. It's not a guarantee. And these are things that ideally you would A/B test out and figure out. Or if you know this audience, like for the game I'm currently working on, Farmville 2, I know this about my audience. I know that they don't like chance. So I would never do a random drop. I would always show them a guaranteed reward. Know your audience, know what you want, why you're choosing the design.
Thank you.
Okay, going forward to why this for our players, right? This is something I really, really enjoy and love about Zynga. You walk into any of the Zynga studios and you see this. What will our players thank us for? in any of our offices. Why are we doing this for our players? When we're designing something, how are we expecting our players to react to it? Zynga asked the question, what will our players thank us for? I, personally as a designer, take a slightly more pessimistic approach to that. I ask myself the question, what are they going to go onto a forum and complain about? Players complain. Everybody knows this. They complain and complain and complain. You ask yourself that question, what are they going to complain about? How can you capitalize on the love as well as how do you mitigate for those complaints? Because honestly, at times you have to do things that players are not going to enjoy. Things you do for a business reason. And a lot of monetization pinches, a lot of paywalls that do this. How do you mitigate the risk from creating that paywall? How do you ensure that your player isn't going to drop off from the game? Let's look at an example of how you can mitigate that risk. Can you keep it fair? Everybody knows what this game is.
Clash of Clans.
Clash Royale, right? Clash Royale, you have chess. The further up the tier that the chests go, as a non-payer, can you get them? No. What percentage of payers to non-payers do you have in games generally? In free-to-play, it's about 95% non-payers. So effectively, these chests are for your 5%. And that 5% is where you make your revenue. It's where you run the business from. So it's not that you can't create this, but how do you keep it fair? An idea of how you could do this. And a lot of Japanese gacha mechanisms have this mechanism where there's an ability for non-payers to get premium chests by doing an alternative action other than paying through in-app purchases. And that is generally it's seen through a referral system. I as a player, if I get 10 other players into the game, 10 other friends of mine, that inherently has value to the developers because it's increasing. Now from those 10, how many of them can pay? This has a lot of terms to it. ASN is one of the most used ones here. Active social network, where it's how many players do I as a player bring in. Now, if I bring in 10 players, can you give me an epic chest? Is that fair? Maybe. It's different for different games. But when you think about why this for the player, what are they not going to like about it, and how you can kind of alleviate the damage or mitigate that risk of doing this in the first place, it'll help keep that 95% of your players happier. Because without that 95%, the 5% wouldn't have players to play against. It wouldn't be as big a game. The third thing, why this? For the business. Straight up, right? Do a lot of you work with product managers? Yeah, everybody knows what product managers do. They're generally in charge of key metrics. They look at business opportunities. They don't really look too much at mechanics in the game design aspect of it. But a designer and a product manager together are needed to create a great product. And that's because they think more in the business. But as a designer, if you're not thinking how you're going to pinch players, how you're going to monetize, and you're just going to leave it up to someone else, what are they going to do? They may not understand why you did it all unless you've explained it to them. Why process? Why did you choose this daily login bonus as opposed to a spin wheel? This just bolsters that. You need to think about what the metrics that you're targeting. What are the metrics that you're targeting? Very often you see people just say revenue and engagement and leave it there. But again, break it down. You can break down revenue into so many different components. You can break down revenue into number of active payers this week. You can break down revenue into average revenue or median revenue per paying user. You can break down revenue into number of purchases per player per day or per week. The more granular your metric that you're tracking, the easier it is for you to track and to see what kind of increment you can get from these metrics. Just saying my revenue will go up 10% is something hard. Saying I will increase the number of payers by 10%, that can be done or achieved through a starter pack or at conditional trigger points where you think players are pinched enough and you think they can or will show the propensity to pay. Another thing you need to think of is how it's going to affect the economy and the rest of your system, right? You release one feature in a live ops scenario, it's not standing alone. It interacts with the rest of the game. So how does that interact with the rest of the game? Let's look at an example again for this, right? The same example from earlier, it's the daily login bonus from PUBG. On a lot of days, it gives you coins, BP, battle points, right? What do you use those for? You use those to open chests and purchase other things that are not premium. But if you don't keep a track of how this currency is inflating, how much you're granting to players on a daily basis across the entire game, which is effectively your inflow of your economy. If you're not tracking inflow and outflow, how do you know where it's going to be? How do you know it's not inflating? How do you know this currency will be relevant 1 week, 1 month, 1 year from now? Economy is something that you really need to keep a tight control of, and asking yourself, why this for the business? Why this for the metrics? What is my feature that I am currently doing? How is it going to affect the business? As a designer, it is something you need to ask yourself. Yeah? Any questions at this point?
Hi, this is Anmol. I just want to understand what is like the rule of thumb in inflow of currency, because the currency also helps users play, but then they can also inflate the whole system. So how, like, what is the rule of thumb ki itna dena chahiye and this is how much you shouldn't give, or like how do you get to that level?
There's no defined value as a rule of thumb. What I would say to answer your question would be, if you're introducing a new source where you're giving players currency, it's important that you introduce a sink for that currency, a new way for them to spend that. So effectively, the balance of the system is net the same. I get 100 coins on an everyday basis. Now, if I don't introduce a place for the player to spend those 100 coins, that currency is only going to inflate, right? I can introduce something that they may not want to spend on. That also isn't enough, because they're not spending on it. It's going to inflate. So I think what you would do at that point is you'd be simulating these before you release. Like at player level 10, this would be the inflow. This is how much currency they're going to get. 2, for us to effectively sync this, we know that they need to purchase 5 items of this denomination. Yeah, you do a simulation for these sorts of things.
I'm Harish. Actually, regarding this weekly login rewards, right? So is it like dynamic for player to player, because the usage of these rewards might differ from how the players are using those rewards?
I think that's a superb question. Dynamic rewards are definitely important. For a new player who's just joined your game, level 1, what is the kind of currency you're expecting them to have? What is the kind of engagement that you're expecting them to have? So the longer the player has been playing, the higher in level. In PUBG, I don't think it's a really great example because the prices are pretty flat. The prices don't really increase the longer you play the game, because there isn't a direct progression system in a single player way. This is more multiplayer. So ideally, in a game like Farmville 2, expansions of land, the first land that you expand to would say cost you 1,000 coins. But the 10th expansion would definitely not cost 1,000 coins. It would cost an exponential value of that. So it depends on the system that you're applying this to. If it is an exponentially growing system, you do need to inflate the rewards, because you are inflating what you're asking for. Your ask from the player in terms of the amounts have gone up, so your grants should also go up. Not to the same degree, but in a linear fashion at least.
And second thing is like generally, like, I used to play one game and I get like, spin wheel every day. Okay, so like almost like some 8 to 9 months, I'm not getting the, highest reward. Like even more than that, I can say. Not the highest one, like, maybe last, highest like, 2 or 3 rewards. That demotivates me, and then, I stop playing the game.
That's what I was saying, right? You do these mechanics because you have to on a certain level as a designer, right? You do that mechanic of introducing this chest, which is premium, which only players can get. So they've done this spin wheel, that it's really difficult to get that reward. But how do they mitigate that risk? Do they do a calculation saying at least once in 6 months, I want this player to get this reward? Otherwise, as you said, you're just going to be demotivated as a player and feel like the game is cheating you. The second this thought creeps in where the game is cheating you, you're very likely to lapse from that game. Right? Mitigate that risk. Do it in a way. That's a very simple thing. It could just be, you could have a check saying, when was the last time they got a reward greater than this amount? If it has been that duration, make sure. You can fake these spin wheels, right? These spin wheels aren't true chance. There's a chance component, and often they're pseudo-random. So the longer you fail, the next time the higher the success chance should be. So you've asked yourself all these questions. Why players? Why business? Right? Why design process? It doesn't mean you're not going to end up with this. You still may end up there. There's a small asterisk there. I was a little cheeky about this. There's one other thing you can do, right? Other than ask yourself why. Let me ask you all a question here. You all are done building a game. It's done. It's ready. Good to go. Ship. What's one really important thing that you need to do? You're done. You're done testing it. Market it, right? You have to market it. Marketing, the sell of the game, it's important. You don't sell your game, how are players going to know about it? How are they going to know that this game is amazing? How are they going to know this is the game for me, this is the game I want to play? The same way, you're doing a feature. You've documented it in just text, white slides, blank text, Times New Roman font number 10. So it's just walls and walls and walls of text. Are the people on your team going to read this document? No, right? You're not going to read that document. How do they know about this idea? How do they know the genius of your feature design, the genius of your mechanic? Effective documentation is a great tool. You need to make sure your team is as hyped, as excited, as pumped for the idea as you are. They need to be backing it 100%. The engineers need to be on board. The artists have this amazing idea of how it should look visually, right? Because it doesn't just stop with design. Design is a collaborative process, game design. Everybody on a game team is in charge of the end product, end feature that goes to the player. But it's a designer's primary responsibility. And part of that responsibility is to make sure everybody else is hyped about that. Make sure everybody else is on board and know why we're doing this. Why for the players, why as a process, and why we're doing it for a business. Those three big whys. After this, I'm going to be sharing this deck on my LinkedIn, and attached is a spec template that I use here, and it's something that I have evolved with the past 5 years. I'm going to do a quick run through of it, but I think effective spec writing is it's a talk of its own. But please check out my LinkedIn. This link should be there. It's not just this, it's the actual spec flow with some examples as well. And for anybody doing feature design on a live ops scenario, if you follow all of these things, documentation-wise, you should be good to go. You do all of that, and it might surprise you. What you planned versus what you get. You may get a lot more out of it because your team has rallied, your team has come together, your vision has gone, it is seeped into everybody. Everybody now knows, everybody's added that little bit more, and it's just gotten better from where you started off. You'll get more from what you expected your vision to be as a designer, and you'll get some love from your players. That's that feedback loop that just makes your journey as a designer complete. When your players love what you've done. I think that's the end of my talk.